Somalia is another example where foreign interventionists struggle to maintain peace. Twice the United Nations has tried to quell rebellion and establish a government. Al-Qaeda-affiliated Al-Shabaab has taken control of much of the country, leaving only a small part of the capital, Mogadishu, for the government to rule. That's because the current president, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, enjoys the protection of UN forces in the country. Over in Sudan, ethnic fighting has displaced thousands, killed hundreds, created large refugee camps, unable to meet the needs of the growing number. The fighting has been over who controls the oil towns of Bentiu and the Upper Nile state. It gave birth to the world's newest country in July 2011. The South complained that much of the oil money was used to develop the north of Sudan, while the South, where much of the oil comes from, has been ignored of development.
It will bring a problem because he's the one who started by killing.
Much of Sudan's new generation was born into refugee camps. There have been times that international intervention came at the nick of time. Many African militaries are made up of former rebels who decided to join the government. However, the real rebels who refuse to defect tend to be more equipped than the national army. Access to an illegal weapons market, blood money, and illegal deals are to thank for this. Therefore, dealing with insurgency has been made more successful by advanced and equipped military from outside the United Nations or African Union forces backed by the United Nations. Sometimes help has come from individual members of the international community, like in the case of the Central African Republic and in Mali. As of December last year, 1,000 extra French soldiers were headed to the CAR to supplement the 400 already on the ground and an underpowered regional intervention force led by the African Union. French troops have also been in the DR Congo, in Chad, in Rwanda, in Côte d'Ivoire, Libya, and in Mali. Analysts believe only Africans understand the root cause of their problems and therefore hold the solutions. But the inability of the continent to organize an army ready to respond to crisis situations means a continuous dependence on the West for such interventions.
You're ready to fire.
As of January, the African Union at its biannual summit was yet to decide on modalities on forming an African standby force to better respond to conflicts across the continent. The Africa Standby Force was supposed to be launched in 2010 with continents based across Africa, but the date has been postponed repeatedly. The AU now wants the force to be operational by next year. In the meantime, inspired by the crisis in Mali in 2012, some African nations have called for a temporary rapid intervention force that would respond to conflicts until the standby force is ready. To the security situation in Nigeria, the difficulty has been in getting neighboring African countries to partner to deal with insurgency and terrorism. Nigeria is surrounded by Francophone countries who pay much allegiance to France. Naturally, they're skeptical of their Anglophone neighbors. But it is clear, it is time to put all of the distrust aside and work for the greater good. For no matter how much international intervention in Africa receives, insurgency on the continent will always be our problem until we face it. While Nigerian officials have promised the president is doing all he can to find the missing Chibok schoolgirls and fight terrorism, world leaders agree that terrorism, the type experienced here, is not peculiar to Nigeria alone. Terrorism is a global problem, and much as the attention is on finding the missing Chibok schoolgirls, it's also more important to keep our eyes on the ball, to prevent the bombings, cut the source of funding for Boko Haram, equip the military with the necessary weapons to fight the insurgency, tighten our borders and ensure that partnership with surrounding African neighbors is strengthened to prevent a recurrence of a sequence of violence spreading through the region. It's not an easy task, and it may take a while before it's fully implemented, but when it is, we would all be the better for it. And in the meantime, Nigerian diplomats have been defending the nation's sovereignty. Channel Television's correspondent in South Africa, Betty Diba, spoke with one of them, the Nigerian Consul General to South Africa, Ambassador Oke Emuche.
It wasn't really, it was more of consultations. His Excellency the President was there. They met on the sidelines of the inauguration. There are bills to meet. There is an AU meeting coming up next month. So what they did today was really more of consultations, because what we are facing is international. It's important to record that for 35 years or more, the United Kingdom was being bombed by the Irish Republican Army. Algeria was under threat. Israel, bombs were flying all over in Tel Aviv. America had their own 9/11. So terrorism is international. No one country can handle it. It requires a lot of cooperation. So the meeting today, or the consultation today, was on the sideline of the inauguration. They're going to meet on the platform of the AU in the course of June, next month.
Okay, but some of the leaders are already complaining, they're on record complaining about having help from outside Africa.
Our president was in Paris for a summit that included Nigeria and other West African countries and the French government. Help is coming from everywhere. Americans are assisting, the Israelis are assisting. We're seeking help and we're getting help.
But some African leaders like President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda and Paul Kagame of Rwanda have had not very nice things to say about that, seeking help outside Africa.
I think that has been handled at the highest level. The comments which we've had about, they are very unfortunate, so, to say the least. But it's been addressed at the highest levels.
When we come back after the break is our first interview with Nigeria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Professor Joy Ogwu. Please stay with us.
Fun, inspiration, and knowledge. That's what you get from readers, writers, publishers, and the entire book world. Get some interesting reviews, events, interviews, and latest updates from the book world. The channel's book club, inspiring you one page at a time.
Welcome back. And on Thursday last week, the United Nations Security Council's Al-Qaeda Sanctions Committee approved adding Boko Haram to its list of groups subject to financial and arms sanctions. Therefore, it is now an offense for any individual or entity to provide financial or material support to Boko Haram, including the provision of arms or recruits. This comes just a month after Nigeria assumed a presidency of the UN Security Council, where Boko Haram and all its activities were condemned. The members of the Security Council underlined the need to bring perpetrators, organizers, financiers, and sponsors of reprehensible acts of terrorism to justice, and urged all states, in accordance with their obligations under international law, to cooperate actively with Nigeria in this regard. Our correspondent, Winga Ashiru, had a chat with the then president of the council, Professor Joy Ogwu.
Now we'll be going into the interesting discussion, your tenure. Quite a huge expectation greeted your tenure as your appointment as the president of the United Nations Security Council. And Nigerians back home are asking, what are the gains?
Security sector reform has been our preoccupation. In this mission, since 2009, we had cooperation with South Africa on security sector reform, and then it became a biennial event. South Africa was just emerging from conflict. We have been in peacetime, but we needed to change security sector architecture. And during our presidency in 2011, we were able to negotiate what we call PRST. PRST is only presidential statement of the Security Council, delineating the terms of security sector reform. And during this comeback to the Council, we were determined to have a resolution emanate from this. And I believe that is a milestone, not only for the United Nations, but also for post-conflict societies and for Nigeria. As a post-conflict phenomenon, you know, there's always a total breakdown of order, of the rule of law following a conflict. And what is needed first and foremost is to reform and reorientate the entire security sector architecture. Because in the absence of the rule of law, in the absence of peace and security, development, it is impossible for development to take place. They need to reform the police, they need to reform the armed forces who had gone their separate ways. They need to reform their justice system. So, but we thought, on reflection, that it is not only post-conflict environments that need security sector reform, that security sector reform could also be a preventive strategy to conflict. And this idea was really welcomed by the entire community, because peacekeeping is beginning to cost a lot of money. And if we can find ways to short-circuit the concept of peacekeeping and look for preventive ways, preventive strategies to conflict. And so that was why we were greatly encouraged. We need security sector reform in the armed forces to meet contemporary needs, in the police, and every security sector at home. Take, for example, the relationship with the police. That's just an example. The police must be seen as the guardian of the citizen. But first, he must learn how to be a good citizen before he becomes the guardian of the citizen. The citizen must view police as a friend, a protector. There is no need to be frightened about the police. And it goes back to our colonial past. Yes, they enforce the law, but imagine the concept of Olokpa, the man with the stick. The man with the stick symbolizes authority, but the man with the stick also symbolizes the oppressor. The citizen must not see the police as an oppressor, but as a guardian. So we need a great deal of reorientation, both on the part of the law enforcement and on the part of all citizens. And in this resolution 2151 is incorporated the reform of the justice sector, because it's all an integral part of the entire rule of law. The justice system, the citizen expects justice, and the citizen must receive justice. It's an omnibus reform, which is very, very positive in the development agenda. If you don't tackle these basic reforms, then you have an environment that is not conducive to development. And as you know, resolutions are binding on all member states. But we are expected to run with this resolution, begin to implement them at the national level, at the sub-regional level, at the continental level, and of course, bring all our ideas and the results together to see how much we have done in its implementation. That is what I intend to do.
Your Excellency, Professor Joy Ogu, thank you very much indeed for being a part of this interview. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. God bless you.
This is where we end the program this week. You can reach us via Diplomatic Channel at channelstv.com or at Diplomatic Chan at Amarachi_Ubani or our page on facebook.com/Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. Thanks for watching.